When Elspeth MacDara died on a Sunday morning in late November, her daughter and her son-in-law divided what she left behind before the ground was hard enough to bury her. The house on Millbrook Crescent sold in 11 days. The savings account, just under $22,000 after the funeral costs, went to Elspeth's son, Gareth, who had handled the estate paperwork and billed $300 an hour for doing so. He took the car, a 4-year-old Subaru he'd been borrowing since August anyway. He took the tools from the basement workshop, the power drill and the miter saw and the sander Elspeth had used to restore furniture she found at yard sales on summer weekends. What he did not want was the laundromat. It sat on the corner of Haverstock Street and Rue des Pens in the lower part of Granby, Quebec, a building the city had flagged twice for sidewalk repair. 12 machines, 4 dryers, a change dispenser that jammed in cold weather, and a hand-lettered sign in the window that read MacDara's Wash and Fold in blue paint that had been fading since 1987. "It's losing money," Gareth said, dropping the keys on the kitchen counter beside 2 bankers' boxes he'd labeled Mom's Misc. "Hydro alone is killing it. I talked to a guy who does commercial properties. He said maybe $800 for the machines, but you'd have to clear it out yourself." He nudged the boxes toward his sister with his foot. "Dad's old records are in there, some notebooks. I went through it. Nothing useful." Norah picked up the keys. They were on a plain ring, no fob, just a strip of electrical tape on the largest one that read front in their mother's printing. "That's it," she said. "That's it." She looked around the kitchen, already half cleared, already becoming someone else's problem. "I guess that's it," she said. Norah MacDara was 53 years old. She had been divorced for 14 months, the kind of divorce that doesn't happen all at once but in slow increments. Until one morning, you realize you've been alone for a year without anyone's saying the word out loud. The apartment she was renting in Montreal was above a pharmacy on Rue Ontario, 1 bedroom, radiators that clanged but rarely produced heat. On her kitchen table sat a folder of documents from the credit union she had stopped opening. A financial advisory practice she had spent 9 years building had dissolved when her business partner, who was also her husband, had taken the client list with him when he left. She had not made a single recommendation to a single client in over a year. She had not trusted her own judgment enough to try. The failure of the marriage and the failure of the practice had arrived within 6 weeks of each other, and somewhere in the math of that she had stopped being able to separate them. As if both things had failed for the same reason, and that reason was her. She had also not visited her mother in the 3 months before Elspeth died. She had told herself it was the drive, the 4 hours each way, the state of her own finances, the particular weight of showing up somewhere with nothing good to report. Her mother had understood, Gareth said. Elspeth always understood. That was the thing Norah could not put down. Now it was a Thursday in early December, gray and cold, and the laundromat sat waiting for her, at the end of a street she hadn't walked since she was 11 years old. She parked her rented Hyundai on the curb and sat for 10 minutes before she could make herself go in. The salvage company opened at 8. If she could catalog what was worth hauling by then, she could let them take the machines, clear maybe $1,000, enough to cover the drive back and 1 month of the pharmacy apartment, while she figured out what a person does when they have run out of things to figure out. She unlocked the front door. The smell reached her before anything else. Not the detergent smell she expected, the artificial lemon and chemical blue of a public laundromat. Something older, warm fabric and steam, and something underneath it she could not name immediately. And then she could, because it was simply Elspeth. The particular warmth of her, the cedar and wool, and the hand cream she'd used for 30 years, alive in the walls of this building, the way a person's smell lives in a place long after the person is gone. Norah stood in the doorway and breathed it. The machines were old but clean. The folding tables had been wiped down. The change dispenser was plugged in, its light on. Someone had swept the floor recently enough that there was no grit under her boots. At the back of the room, past the last row of dryers, was a small office Norah didn't remember existing. A door she had always assumed was a supply closet, its frame painted the same off-white as the walls, so it nearly disappeared. She tried the second key on the ring and it opened. Inside was a desk, a chair, and 3 shelves of notebooks. Not accountants' ledgers. Spiral-bound notebooks, the kind students use, their covers worn soft, stacked in rows, 3 deep, dated on the spines in her mother's handwriting. The oldest was from 1989, the most recent from 8 months ago. On the desk, a coffee tin with a strip of masking tape that read for the jar. A manila envelope with the name of a law firm she didn't recognize, Thibault, Renaud and Associates, printed in the corner, and in the center of the desk, on top of everything else, a plain white envelope with one word on the front. Norah. She sat down in her mother's chair and did not open anything yet. Outside, a bus went by on Haverstock, its air brakes exhaling. Then the street was quiet again. If you found this story and you're still with me right now, stay with us. Because what Elspeth McDara hid in that office is the kind of thing most people carry their whole lives without ever telling anyone. And her daughter is about to find out that the woman she thought she knew was only the surface of something much deeper. Subscribe to Mighty Stories if you haven't already. Because this one gets more beautiful before it gets harder. She opened the envelope with her name on it first, because it was the only thing in the room that had been written for her. 3 pages. Her mother's handwriting, the letters smaller and more careful at the top, wider and looser by the last paragraph. The way handwriting goes when a person is tired, or when they have saved the hardest things for last. Dear Norah, if you found this room, then I'm gone, and you've driven down to Granby to empty the place out. You've probably been sitting in the car for longer than you want to admit. I know you. I should have told you about all of this while I was alive. I tried, a few times, but every time I got close to it, it sounded either like I was complaining or like I was asking for something, and I was never trying to do either. So I wrote it down instead. I put it where someone willing to actually clean the place out would find it. You always were the one who showed up to do the hard thing, even when you told yourself you weren't. There's a lot in those notebooks. Read them when you're ready. But first I want to tell you why the lights are always on. Norah stopped. She looked up at the window of the office, which looked out onto the main floor. Above the last dryer, a utility lamp burned on a long extension cord, plugged into an outlet near the ceiling. She had assumed it was left on by accident. She turned back to the letter. The laundromat has been open every day for 37 years. I closed the door at 10, but I never cut the lights. People in this neighborhood know that. They know that as long as that light is on in the window, the door isn't locked all the way. You lean on it, it opens. I left an extra 50 in the till, always, so whoever came in after hours could get their change. I started doing it the winter your father died, 1991. The Moreau family on Rue des Pen, Claudette and her 3 kids. The husband had just left. It was February. She came to the door at 11 at night, with 2 garbage bags full of wet laundry and no change, and she stood on the step in the cold, not sure if she should knock. I was in the back. I saw her through the window, and I almost didn't go. I was tired, Norah. I had just buried your father. I had 2 children and a mortgage and a laundromat. I didn't know how to run by myself, and it was 11 at night and I was exhausted. And I almost told her through the glass that we were closed, come back in the morning. Instead, I opened the door. Claudette Moreau sat in that laundromat until 1 in the morning, while her children slept on the folding chairs, and I washed everything she owned. I didn't charge her. I gave her a cup of tea from the kettle in the office, and we didn't talk about anything important, and she went home clean. I kept the light on after that every night, and I kept the door not quite locked, because I thought about what would have happened if I'd turned her away, and I couldn't live inside that version of myself. Norah set the letter down in her lap. Her hands were not steady. She picked up the nearest notebook, opened it to the middle. March 8, 1994. Man came in at 11:30, said his name was Denny, just got out of Bordeaux, nobody in the city who'd have him. I did his laundry and gave him 20 from the till and the number for the halfway house on St. Hubert that Père Beaulieu told me about last winter. He shook my hand with both of his. I told him the next person who needed it would do the same for someone else. She turned the page. November 2, 1997. Young woman, maybe 19. Wouldn't give her name. Bruise along her jaw she was covering with her collar. Did her wash, gave her tea, did not ask her anything she didn't volunteer. She said she was fine. I said I believed her. At close I wrote down the number for Carrefour Poor Femmes on a slip of paper and left it under the detergent box on top of her dryer. She took it. I saw her put it in her coat pocket before she left. I don't know what she did with it. I hope it was what she needed. That's the hardest part of this work. You send them back out into the night and you don't know. Norah read for a long time without moving. Outside, the December light shifted from gray to a pale thin silver that was as close to bright as Granby got in winter. The notebooks were full of people. Name after name, year after year, hundreds of entries across 3 decades. The woman who came in every Sunday for 4 years with her autistic son because the sound of the machines was the only sound that calmed him. The family who had lost their apartment in a fire and used the laundromat's address to receive mail for 3 months, while they waited for a shelter placement. The teenage boy who had run away from something he wouldn't name, who Elspeth had let sleep on the folding chairs for 2 nights, running and fed from the bag. Lunch she brought herself, and who she had driven to the bus station on the 3rd morning, after calling the youth intake line and confirming there was a bed for him in Montreal. He asked me why she had written. I told him because the light was on, and he came in, and that was enough of a reason. By the time Norah opened the manila envelope, she had been in the office for 3 hours. The salvage company had opened and opened again without her calling. The envelope held a deed. The building at 214 Haverstock Street, corner of Rue des Pins, purchased outright 20 years ago for $104,000, cash, in the name of Elspeth Grace McDara. Below it, a second document. A statement from Thibault, Renault and Associates outlining the terms of an irrevocable trust, signed 8 years ago, the building and the attached funds designated in perpetuity for the operation of the laundromat as a community resource, and a passbook, Caisse Populaire de Granby. The first deposit dated 31 years ago, $15. The entries ran down the pages in small columns, week after week, amounts that were never large, sometimes 20, sometimes 5, once 40, once 2. The final entry had been made 6 weeks before Elspeth died. The running total beside it was $41,200. Norah stared at the number. Her mother had run a laundromat where the most expensive load cost $4.75. She had driven a 2009 Civic until the floor rusted through. She had sent both her children to CEGEP and told them she had saved for it, which she had, $1 at a time, alongside this account that neither of them had known existed. She went back to the letter. The building is paid for, Norah. Has been for 20 years. I bought it the day I had enough in the trust account that no landlord could ever put me out. Your brother doesn't know about the trust. He knows about the savings account from the Bank of Montreal, the one he's already planning how to divide. He is a good man in some ways, but he has always measured things in square footage, and he would not understand what this building is for. I had Maitre Renault set it up so he couldn't dissolve it if he tried. The money in the trust and the money in the Caisse are for one thing, keeping the lights on and keeping the machines running for anyone who needs them. No questions, no conditions. I know you lost your practice, Norah. I know you lost more than that. Gareth mentioned some of it and you mentioned less, which is your way. You've always protected people from the things that were hurting you, as if letting them see it would make you responsible for their worry. But I want to tell you something I should have said on the phone. Every time I heard you make yourself sound fine when you weren't. Losing something you built doesn't mean you built it wrong. It means something broke that you didn't put there. There's a difference, and I need you to know that I know the difference even if you don't right now. Keep the light on, Norah. That's all this is. A light in a window so someone cold and embarrassed and out of options sees that the door will open, and nobody inside will make them feel small for needing it. That's worth more than a Subaru and a miter saw. I love you. I was never good at just saying it. I'm better at leaving the kettle on. Norah folded the pages and held them against her chest. She was crying by then, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere sealed, from the part of a person that has been telling itself it's fine for 14 months. And her mother's voice was in every line of that letter the way it had been in every phone call she'd cut short, because she didn't want to admit how badly she was. Struggling to a woman who had buried a husband, and run a business alone and raised 2 children, and apparently also, quietly, with no announcement and no credit, kept a light burning for half the lost people in Granby for 37 years. She sat in her mother's chair in her mother's office with the notebook spread around her, and she cried until she didn't. And then she sat very still in the quiet of the laundromat, while the dryers she had not started ticked gently in the cold. Her phone buzzed. Gareth, hey. His voice had the brisk neutral tone he used for logistics. Listen, I've been on with a commercial assessor this morning. There's a developer out of Sherbrooke who's been buying up the lower Haverstock corridor. They got the hardware place last month and the old print shop. They're looking at the corner lot. Our corner lot. A pause. They're offering $280,000, Norah. She didn't answer immediately. $280 for a laundromat. We were going to give the machines away for parts. It's in a trust, Norah said. What? The building. Mom put it in trust, for the laundromat. It's not ours to sell. The silence on the line lasted 4 full seconds. That's, Norah, listen. A trust set up by someone in declining health, without disclosing it to the estate? That's a capacity question. That's something a lawyer can look at. She met with her lawyers 6 weeks before she died, Gareth. She was fine. I'm just saying we should have it reviewed before you decide anything. She decided it. 30 years ago, and then again every year since. Read the date on the trust document when you get around to asking for it. Another silence. $280,000, he said, as if she hadn't understood the number. I know what it is, Norah said. It's not for sale. Talk to Maître Renaud if you want the legal version. She ended the call. Her hand was completely steady. Across the room in the window, the utility lamp burned on its long cord. She left it on when she went out to find a hardware store. Stay with us. Because the woman who's about to walk back into that laundromat isn't the same woman who drove down from Montreal to empty it. And what Gareth does next is the part of this story I've been wanting to get to. Norah did not drive back to Montreal that night. She slept in the small room above the laundromat that she hadn't known existed until she found a narrow staircase behind the office shelves. A cot, a lamp, a hook on the wall. The window looked out over Rue des Pins, and she lay awake, watching the orange wash of the streetlight on the ceiling, and listening to the occasional truck on Haverstock, and thinking about Claudette Moreau, standing at the door in February 1991, with 2 garbage bags of wet laundry, and no change, and deciding whether to knock. In the morning, a man came across the street. He was past 70, in a parka the color of a stop sign, and he walked with the careful gait of someone whose hips had opinions. He tried the door, found it unlocked, and stood blinking in the entrance until he saw Norah behind the counter. You're Elspeth's, he said. Not a question. Norah, her daughter. He nodded once, as if he'd been told to expect her. Gervais Trottier. I run the dépanneur across the road. Your mother and I, we go back 30 years. He looked at the machines, the swept floor, the lamp still burning in the window. Something moved across his face. She's really gone. She is. He pulled a stool from under the counter and sat uninvited, the way a person sits in a place they've been sitting for decades. I kept the lamp going, he said, after she couldn't. The past few months she'd call me. I'd come over in the evenings and make sure it was on. She was very specific about that. He looked at the window. Never told me the whole story of why. Some of it I guessed. Some of it I found out by watching. Tell me, Norah said. So he did. He told her how the regulars in the neighborhood had known for years that McDara's was not entirely what it appeared. How Elspeth ran a regular laundromat in the daytime, and a different kind of place at night. How the social workers at the CLSC 2 blocks over had quietly started sending people here when the shelters were full, and the food banks were closed. How the woman at the shelter on Rue Drummond knew Elspeth by her first name and called her on the hard nights. How Elspeth had for the last 15 years maintained a small stock of clean donated clothing in the back storage room, socks, underwear, winter coats, in a range of sizes, and offered them with the same matter-of-fact casualness she offered change for the machines. She told me once, Gervais said, that the hardest part wasn't doing it. The hardest part was not being able to follow them. He looked at the window. She'd get someone sorted, clean clothes, warm, a number to call, and watch them walk back out into the winter. And then she'd lie awake. Because there was no one else on that road, just her and a lamp. Norah thought about the line in the notebooks. That's the hardest part of this work. You send them back out into the night and you don't know. She thought about 14 months of not answering her mother's calls before 9 in the morning because she didn't have anything good to say yet, and her mother's voice made her feel the full weight of how badly she was doing. She knew, Norah said, about my situation. Gervais was quiet a moment. She didn't say much directly, but she worried. She said you were the kind of person who stopped talking when things got hard, and that it was the most dangerous thing about you. He paused. She also said you were the only one of her children who would know what to do with the place. She was right, I think. People came that day, not for the laundromat, for Norah. The word had moved through the lower Haverstock neighborhood the way it does in a neighborhood that has been watching the same window light for 30 years. A woman named Daphne arrived first, around 10, with her teenage daughter. She stood in the door looking at the machines the way people look at something they weren't certain would still be there. I needed to see it was still open, she said, after I heard about Elspeth. I just needed to see the light was on. She had been coming here for 9 years, she said, after her husband left. She was a newcomer, her English and French both uncertain, her documentation complicated, and there were months in the early years when the laundromat had been the only place in the city where no one asked her any questions she couldn't answer. Elspeth had helped her contact a settlement worker, had let her use the laundromat's address for a critical piece of mail when her housing situation was too unstable to receive it, had, on 3 occasions, quietly pressed a bus pass into her hand as she was leaving without any discussion of repayment. She told me the machine ate my toonie, Daphne said, and almost smiled. Every time. After her came a man in his 50s who said he had spent 4 nights sleeping on the folding chairs in the winter of 2009 after he lost his job at the Bombardier plant and couldn't tell his family yet. Elspeth had known and had said nothing except to set this alarm and make sure he was up and gone before 7. She fed me from a thermos, he said, every morning. Just coffee and a couple of rolls. I don't know where she got them. She said the bakery sent over extras. I found out later from Gervais that she bought them herself. A retired school bus driver came, a man named Elwood, who said that Elspeth had, without announcement, begun washing the donated clothing from his church's winter collection and returning it pressed and folded for 8 years running, and had refused every offer of payment on the grounds that the machines were running anyway. An older woman came whose husband was in the long-term care facility on Boulevard Laurier, and who came to the laundromat every Thursday to wash her husband's things because the facility, laundry was rough, and he had always hated rough sheets. And Elspeth had understood this and had reserved the machine nearest the window for her for the past 4 years without ever formally saying so. She remembered everyone, the woman said. That's what you don't know unless you've been coming here. She remembered your name from 1 year to the next, what machine you liked, whether you took your coffee with milk. She made people feel like they weren't just a problem she was managing. Each person who came spoke differently, but they all said the same thing underneath the words. They said, this place saw us when we felt invisible. They said, she never once made us feel small for needing it. Norah stood behind the counter and listened, and did not try to respond to everything because she had learned, in the last 24 hours, that some things are better held than answered. Late in the afternoon, she went back to the office and found the notebook she'd been looking for, the one dated from 14 months ago. She found the entry inside, 8 pages from the back. October 14th. Norah called this evening. She sounded the way she sounds when she's trying to make something sound smaller than it is. The practice is gone, I think. She didn't say it directly. She never says anything directly when she's ashamed of it, which is the most heartbreaking thing about her, because there is never anything to be ashamed of, not in my eyes. She's blaming herself. I can hear it. The same way I hear it when anyone comes in here having lost something and decided it means something permanent about who they are. I wanted to say, losing a thing you built only tells you that something outside you broke. It doesn't tell you anything about what you built or why. I couldn't say it on the phone because she would have heard me trying to comfort her, and she would have closed the door. Maybe she'll find this someday. Maybe she'll find all of it. I am proud of her in ways I don't know how to say out loud without sounding like I'm reciting it. So I'll write it here instead, where she'll find it after I can't embarrass her with it. I am proud of her. She is stubborn and private, and she carries everything alone, and she is the most capable person I know, and she has not figured out yet that those last 2 things are not a compliment, unless you also know when to put something down and ask for help. I hope she keeps the light on. I think she will. She just needs to find out it was always hers to keep. Norah closed the notebook and pressed both palms flat against it on the desk. She sat there a long time. Gareth's lawyer's letter arrived 3 days later, addressed to her at the laundromat. It challenged the trust on the grounds that Elspeth had made significant financial decisions. The purchase of the building, the establishment of the Casey account, without disclosing them to the estate, and that this pattern of concealment raised questions about her capacity at the time of the trust's creation. Norah read it at the folding counter and set it down. Gervais came in 10 minutes later, as if he had seen her face through the window. He went to the back and came out with a cardboard box. Inside were 37 years of tax returns for the laundromat, each one filed by Elspeth herself, each one showing the building's assessed value, each one bearing her signature in blue ink. A folder of receipts for the building's maintenance, dated and itemized, in Elspeth's handwriting. A letter from the attending physician at the Clinique St. Luc, noting that at Elspeth's last 3 annual appointments, she had been cognitively intact, oriented, and specifically asked to update her estate documentation. She had the appointment with Maître Renaud 6 weeks before she died, Gervais said. I drove her. She was sharp as a pin, she knew exactly what she was signing, and then he did something the legal process did not require. He made phone calls. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning at the Palais de Justice in Granby, a small room with 2 tables and 4 rows of chairs. Norah sat at the left table with Maître Renaud, who had driven from Sherbrooke. Gareth sat at the right table with his lawyer, his wife Tracy behind him, her coat still buttoned as if she intended to leave at any moment. The chairs behind them were full. Daphne came with her daughter, the man from the Bombardier layoffs, the woman who washed her husband's sheets, Elwood from the church collection, half a dozen others Norah had never met, people Gervais had called, people who had called other people, people who had simply heard what was happening and driven down to be in the room when someone tried to say that Elspeth McDarragh had not been in her right mind. Gareth's lawyer presented his case. Hidden accounts, undisclosed assets, a pattern of financial secrecy inconsistent with sound judgment. Maître Renaud answered with the medical records, the tax returns, the dated receipts, the physician's letter. Then, with the judge's permission, she let the room speak. Daphne stood first. She described the lost mail, the bus passes, the way Elspeth had called a settlement worker from the back office and spoken in careful French on Daphne's behalf without making her feel that she was being handled. A woman in her right mind did that, she said. A woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The man from the Bombardier layoff stood and said he had been employed continuously for the 14 years since that winter, that his family did not know about those 4 nights, and that the only reason he was here today was that Elspeth McDarragh had not called anyone, or filed anything, or told a single person that he was sleeping on her chairs. She just set the alarm and made coffee, he said. That's not diminished capacity. That's more dignity than most people know how to give. The woman who washed her husband's sheets said, she reserved my machine for 4 years without writing it down anywhere. She just remembered, and she never in 4 years asked me how he was doing in a way that required me to say he was getting worse. She asked in a way that let me say he was comfortable. Those are 2 different questions, and she knew the difference every single time. One after another, and Gareth sat through all of it. He did not look at his lawyer. He did not look at Tracy, who at some point had quietly moved from behind him to the far end of the back row. He watched the faces of the people standing up to describe his mother, a woman he had visited twice a year and called reliably on her birthday, and thought he knew. The judge reviewed the documentation and dismissed the challenge before noon. The trust was valid. Norah McDarragh was the sole trustee. The matter was closed. Gareth's lawyer gathered his folders. Tracy was at the door with her keys already in her hand. Gareth stood and walked toward the back of the room slowly, and he had to pass the full row of people who had come for his mother. He did not stop, but as he reached Norah's row and his steps slowed, and he looked at her, his jaw was tight in a way that cost him something. Beneath the certainty she had watched him carry, since the day after the funeral there was a crack, the first one. Then he was through the door and gone. Winter thinned toward spring. The laundromat was different by March. Not dramatically, it looked nearly the same from the street. But the machines had been serviced, the change dispenser replaced with one that worked in -20, the storage room in the back reorganized and restocked with donations that had started coming in once the word got out that McDarragh's was still open, and still what it had always been. Gervais had spread the word, in the particular way a depanner owner spreads word, which is to say he mentioned it to every person who came in for milk or lottery tickets for 2 months running. The CLSC put the laundromat back on their resource list, which Elspeth had apparently been removed from during the months when her health made regular hours uncertain. The shelter on Rue Drummond called Norah directly, a woman named Brenda, who said, "We weren't sure anyone was going to keep it going." "Your mother was. She was important to a lot of people in this neighborhood who don't usually get to be important to anyone." Norah had spent those months living above the laundromat, in the room with the cot and the hook on the wall. She had enrolled in a bookkeeping course at the community college, because the trust needed proper oversight, and she was going to be the one to provide it. She had called a colleague from her old practice. Not her ex-husband's colleagues, but a woman named Claire she had worked with briefly before the marriage, who had her own practice in Laval, and who had said, without Norah having to explain much. "There's always work here if you want it. Come when you're ready." She wasn't ready yet, but she knew what ready felt like, which she hadn't 3 months ago. She had read all 37 notebooks, every entry, every name. She had started a separate document on her laptop, a kind of index, because the notebooks deserved to have their contents known somewhere more findable than a shelf behind a sliding door. She didn't know yet what she would do with it. She thought, sometimes, that the people in those pages deserved to know they had been written down. That someone had noticed them at 11 at night with their wet laundry and their pride and their exhaustion, had written their date and their situation and what they needed, not to collect anything, but so someone would know they had been real. The morning of the soft reopening, not an event, just the morning Norah turned the sign to open before 7 for the first time. Gervais was there before her. He had brought coffee from his dépanneur and a brown bag of croissants from the bakery, 3 streets over, the same bakery, she now understood, that had been supplying Elspeth's extras for years. "Your mother bought these herself," she said. "Every week," Gervais said. "Wouldn't let me pay? Said if I paid it became a system, and a system becomes an obligation, and an obligation makes people feel watched." He set the bag on the counter. She was particular about that. By 9 the machines were running. Daphne came in with 2 bags of laundry and her daughter, who was doing homework at the folding table. Elwood came with a collection from the church drive. 3 people came whom Norah didn't recognize, who loaded machines in silence, and she gave them change and coffee and did not ask them anything. And then Gareth came. He stood in the doorway in a fleece vest. No tie, no Tracy. He looked at the machines and the folding tables and the lamp in the window, burning in the morning light, and at the corkboard Norah had hung beside the office door. The photographs she had found in the desk, years of them, Elspeth behind the counter, Elspeth at the folding table, Elspeth always in the background of someone else's moment, always working, never looking at the camera. The room noticed him. Nobody said anything. Norah came out from behind the counter. "Can we talk?" he said. She walked past him to the door and he followed, and they stood on the sidewalk in front of the sign, with the thin March sun on the brick. Gareth looked at the building for a while before he spoke. "I sat in that courthouse," he said, "and I watched people stand up one after another and describe a woman I visited twice a year. I thought I knew everything about her life. I thought I was the one who understood how things worked, the finances, the estate. I was the executor. I thought that meant I had the whole picture." He paused. "A woman with a stroller went by on the sidewalk giving them space. She never told me about any of it, not once in 37 years. His voice was level, but it was costing him. "I used to think the laundromat was the thing she couldn't let go of. After Dad died, I thought she was holding on to it because it was his and she couldn't face selling it, and I thought that was." He stopped. "I thought it was small, the whole thing. I thought it was small and I was embarrassed by it, same as I was embarrassed by her not retiring, by this neighborhood, by—" He stopped again. "I didn't know there was anything to know. It never occurred to me to ask." Norah waited. She had learned this from the notebooks too. He reached into his vest pocket and took out an envelope. "The Millbrook house closed last month. My share after everything came out to 14,000. I kept back 1,000 for costs." He held the envelope out. 13,000, made out to the trust. Norah took it. "It's not, I know it isn't enough." "No," she said. "But it's a start." She looked at her brother. He was not the man who had dropped the keys on the counter and nudged the boxes with his foot. He was not entirely a different man either. He was a man who had driven 2 hours to stand on a sidewalk and hand over an envelope, and he didn't know the language for the rest of it yet. But he was here, and for now that was enough. He walked to his car. When he pulled out onto Haverstock and turned toward the autoroute, Norah did not wonder whether he'd come back. She thought he might, on his own terms, in his own time. It was enough that he had come at all. Inside, a machine finished its cycle and began its low-grade spin. Daphne's daughter looked up from her homework and then back down. Gervais refilled the coffees without being asked. Elwood was sorting a bag of coats by size, efficiently, as if he'd done it many times, because he had. The bell above the door gave a small sound and Norah turned. A woman was standing just inside the entrance, maybe 30, in a parka that was too thin for March. She had a child on her hip, a boy, maybe 2 years old, and in her other hand 2 large garbage bags, the plastic filmed with cold from being carried outside. She looked at the machines, then at Norah, with the particular expression of a person who is not sure they've come to the right place and is very much hoping they have. "I heard," she said. Her English was careful, accented. "A woman at the community center," she told me. "She said if the light is on, you don't turn people away." "That's right," Norah said. "Come in. The machines on the left have the best water pressure. Second from the end, that one's the warmest spot to sit." The woman looked at her for a moment, as if checking that she meant it. "How long since he's eaten?" Norah asked, nodding at the boy. "This morning. Early." I have some money I can." "You don't need it here," Norah said. "That's not how this place works. You just need to need it, and everybody needs something sometimes." She showed them to the seat by the window, the warmest one, the one that looked out onto Haverstock Street, so you could see who was coming and who was going and know you were not hidden. She went to the small kitchen in the back office and put the kettle on, and cut 2 of Gervaise's croissants onto a plate, and she carried it out and set it on the folding table next to the woman, without comment, and without a bill. The woman looked at the plate and then out the window, and her shoulders came down from somewhere around her ears. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're in the right place," Norah said. "When the machines are done, there's a room in the back if you need somewhere warm to sort your things. Nobody's putting you back out there before you're ready." She went back behind the counter. The morning moved around her, the sound of machines and the smell of warm soap, and her mother everywhere in the walls of the building. Late afternoon, the light going copper and low over Haverstock, Norah went into the back office and opened the bottom desk drawer. She had bought a new notebook 3 days ago. She opened it to the first page, dated it, and picked up a pen. March 14th. Young woman, didn't give her name. Came in from the cold with a boy, maybe 2 years old. I gave them the window seat and a plate of croissants and ran 2 loads. She had a bus ticket to somewhere she wasn't ready to say. When she left, she put 20 cents in the change tin by the door, which was all the change she had in her pocket, and she did it the way someone does a thing they've decided is right even if it costs them. I don't know where she's going. I hope it's towards something. I'll leave the light on tonight. She closed the notebook and set it on the shelf above the desk at the beginning of the row, beside her mother's 37. She walked out, through the laundromat, checking the machines the way she had been learning to check them. She picked up a stray sock from the floor and set it on the lost and found shelf Gervais had installed beside the door. Last Tuesday, a small wooden ledge with a hand-lettered card that said "Left Behind." "It's waiting for you." At the window, she reached up and clicked the lamp on. Outside, Haverstock Street was going dark in the way it did in early spring. Too early, the light withdrawing before anyone was ready for it. A truck went by heading east, then a bus, and then the street was quiet. Elspeth McDara had kept a light burning in this window for 37 years, so that anyone coming down that street in the dark would know that someone inside was awake. And the door was not all the way closed, and nobody in there would ask them a question they didn't want to answer. She had done it alone, without applause, without telling her children, without a plaque or a ceremony, or a single photograph where she was looking at the camera. She had done it because a young widow in February 1991 had stood on a cold step with 2 bags of wet laundry, and Elspeth had made a choice about who she was going to be. Norah stood at the window beside the burning lamp and looked out at the street. There was work to do in the morning. There was a notebook to continue, and a trust to steward, and 37 years of her mother's careful kindness to carry forward in a neighborhood that had been quietly depending on that light. She was not the same woman who had parked a rental car on the curb in December, meaning to call the salvage company by 8. She left the light on.